So hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I hope everyone's had a really good day so far in various panels and discussions over the Better Hospitality Conference. My name is Julian. I am the Managing Director of the Sustainable Restaurant Association. It's really nice to see you here and to be hosting this conversation with some of our friends from the SRA and members who we kind of know well and love the work that you guys are doing. So I have the distinct pleasure of being joined by Andre Lessman, David Cherney, and Ollie Hunter. I will let them introduce themselves, and then we will introduce the subject and kind of get our discussion started. Andre, do you want to go ahead and go first?
Thanks, Julianne. Hello, everybody. And thanks to Domini for putting on this conference. My name is Andre Lessman, and I run a group of independent sustainable restaurants north of London, and we're about 20 years old now. So we've got 20 years of experience of getting it wrong along the way.
Brill, should I hand over to Ollie? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ollie Hunter, and with my wife, I own the Wheat Sheaf in Chiltern Foliot, which was voted Most Sustainable Business of 2019. Thank you very much, SRA. And also author of 2 sustainable cookbooks in the last 2 years. So, yeah.
Brill. And David?
Yeah, hi, I'm David Chenery. Our company is Object Space Place, and we are focused on sustainable hospitality design, big focus around interiors and moving that whole world towards the principles of a circular economy. So that's kind of our mission. I've only got 10 years of making mistakes of experience of making mistakes as OSP, but I've got more experience of making mistakes before that, which hopefully I'll bring to the conversation. But Andre is definitely winning on that account.
Yeah. So we're here this afternoon to talk a little bit about how sustainability can not only be affordable, but how it can also be profitable. So I think one of the biggest questions that we definitely get asked at the SRA is around the cost, and the idea, I think, that persists in people's minds that doing the right thing or being a more sustainable restaurant somehow means that it's going to cost your bottom line loads, and ultimately that it costs the diner more to eat sustainable food. So you get this perception that you can only be a sustainable restaurant or a sustainable business if you are catering to a certain sect of the market and you're willing to kind of add that pricing into your model. And I think the aim of today's discussion is to dispel that thinking and to think a little bit more creatively and to hear your experiences from the 3 of you guys in obviously 3 very different kind of contexts with lots of experience between you, to hear some of the things that you guys have done within your businesses that are not only affordable, but also profitable and making a difference for people and the planet at the same time. So I would be remiss if I didn't start the conversation by reflecting on the sort of crazy situation that we found ourselves in over this past year. So we obviously have experienced the most challenging year for the hospitality sector that anybody could have imagined. Just beginning to reopen our sites outdoors after experiencing long closures, though as most restaurant owners have been quick to say to us, there's been no closure, there has just been pivoting and trying to find different ways of operating in this time. So I want to, I guess, open by talking a little bit about this idea of affordability, profitability as it's applied to this past year, while we've been trying to maintain some level of profitability to keep the industry afloat and to keep our businesses sustainable in the broadest sense of continuing to operate. So Andre, I wonder if you had any reflections that you might want to share on how you've done that this past year.
Thank you for that. I think initially when we were all faced with Boris's words in mid to late March last year, We didn't really know what was going to happen and what was ahead of us. We'd all come out of probably a very busy Christmas and probably hadn't had any holiday. I know we had just opened our 6th restaurant in Oxford, the old Coluccio's. So we were all a little bit knackered. I think when that happened, we all realised there was Mothering Sunday around the corner. So rather than looking too much into the future, which we didn't really know what was going to come, we all had full fridges. We had lots of customers which were desperate to be looked after. And we had loads of suppliers that had, I would say, again, massive volumes of food. It's arguably the busiest day in the entire year for at least fruit and veg suppliers. So all of that gear was just waiting to be shifted. And of course, the supermarkets weren't ready for the immediate lockdown. So there was this immediate impact whereby there was a lack of food. And we remember those photographs and images on social media in relation to the NHS and staff not having enough food to pick up from, Tesco's, etc. So I think a lot of us just did what hospitality has always done. We just reacted and we pivoted and we looked to survive. And we tried to take care of those people and those suppliers and the customers around us in the best possible way that we knew best. We didn't know about furlough. We didn't know about grants. We didn't understand what COVID was. And all we knew was the tap for trade and revenue had been turned off. And it was pretty scary. And I think until furlough came along, I think probably on that day when we were all advised about it, I wouldn't be surprised if half of us ended up crying on that day when we certainly learnt about furlough, because we were all, of the understanding that we'd start having to work for the likes of Amazon. And that was the end of that. And God forbid. So, 12 months down the line, we haven't really stopped. I think we've reached, or just about to reach 100,000 ready-made meals in different sorts, because obviously each lockdown and each period of the year has demanded us as a small business of a few restaurants to work very hard in being able to provide our regulars some food, a touch of something at home, something a bit different, a break to Groundhog Day, and also something to give 20 or 30% of the staff something to do as opposed to staying at home. Because one of the great evils, it's unfortunate, is staying at home has meant that a lot of staff are now coming back mentally fatigued, physically flabby, totally off context, not in focus in regards to what's ahead of them. But that wasn't known at the time. So I think hospitality is a wonderful example of brilliant staff, brilliant managers, wonderful owners, just getting their hands dirty, finding a way, and where there is a will, there is always a way, and making it happen. And I'd say, to finish off on the last 12 months and all the many meals and boxes and gourmet organic burgers and everything else that we've done, one of the only issues I think looking back is that those that have worked very, very hard are probably very tired. And the bonhomie that we enjoy between our competitors and our staff has been slightly splintered by the fact that we have lots of staff who've done nothing and some staff have done everything. And it's very unusual that this wonderful tribe that's called catering has now got this splinter effect. And it's now for us to try and get them all back together again. And it's something we've always taken for granted, that staff in hospitality just really get on. And I'd say that's one of the hidden problems amongst some other issues that we've got to face going forward.
I think that's a really, really good point. And I think, connecting a little bit on what role staffing plays in this picture when we talk about sustainability is a really excellent point. David or Ollie, do you guys have anything else that you want to add about this experience over the last 12 months and how it's maybe framing your thinking?
I'll jump in here. So one of the most amazing and slightly almost spiritual things about the first lockdown, despite all the sort of horrors and the difficulty that was going on, was the silence that we all probably experienced when we weren't working, if we ever got time to not work. And that silence was quite extraordinary, because I don't think we've ever experienced that as a world. And it gave, I sort of jumped straight onto the pizza oven, and Lauren and I were basically doing pizzas flat out for the next how many months. But I suddenly, when you have a silent building, you actually suddenly realize what you need to then turn back on. Whereas before, you sort of started with everything and you can't really work backwards. So I was running the pizza oven and I suddenly realized I could cook pretty much anything I wanted in that pizza oven. But I also had, before the lockdowns, a 3-phase oven going along. And I suddenly realized that I didn't need that 3-phase oven because I can now cook everything in the wood-fired oven. So when we came back on the 4th of July, I got rid of the 3-phase oven and said, we're going to change the menu to only go through the wood-fired oven. The other thing we also did was to sort of buy a smaller fryer. And I know that sounds silly, but again, change the menu, buy a smaller piece of equipment. You're saving 3-phase energy and you're saving oil every time you're changing the oil. And it was just a really simple thing where having that silence, and I think going forward, we should always give ourselves that silence to be able to reflect on our businesses, to make good, proper decisions, and how not to be scared of making those decisions as well.
I think that's a really, really great point, and that sort of segue into thinking about the actual physical space of a restaurant. And I think you're completely right to talk about that silence, because in normal times there's quite a hum to hospitality, right? Like we never experience that in that silence of a building, because there is that sense that you've always got things working. And in the same breath that Andre was mentioning, needing to empty out all your fridges and all of these different things, that just never happens with hospitality, that you go to turning it entirely off. So let's transition from there, I guess, to thinking a little bit about this idea of the physical space of a restaurant and how building sustainability into a physical space can add to that margin and that profitability and that affordability. David, I was wondering if you wanted to speak to that a little bit, and that experience you guys have.
Yeah, no problem. It is interesting, that whole question around does it cost more money to be sustainable is one that we get asked as well. And I've actually been looking in this quite a lot in the last 4 to 6 weeks. And the slight frustration I have is I can't actually find any good data. And even speaking to companies like Bioregional, who are sustainability consultants and get involved in SCAR ratings on fit outs and carbon footprint, they can't tell me whether it costs more or not. I've heard one study that showed that if you look at the built environment in general, slightly more broadly, that a more sustainable design can cost between 2 and 12% more, but I don't know what they were really assessing within that. So it is a bit strange, but from our perspective, we can certainly see that there are areas where there is that happy alignment between being more sustainable and saving money. It kind of splits, I guess, to what we're talking here into 2 different camps. So if you're talking about an existing restaurant that you're working with, or if you're looking to fit out a new one, which obviously is what we tend to spend most of our time doing. So I think when you're looking at an existing space, it's obviously about optimizing any of the things you consume, and the core one being the energy, so the electricity and the gas that you're paying for every month. I don't know if anyone's seen, there was a study done by Hammerson, the guys that own shopping centers, but they're pretty big on sustainability as well. They did a whole study looking at how much the average restaurant operator could save if they used various different energy saving technologies. And they'd looked at the average restaurant spending about £25,000 a year on their energy. And if they implemented these 10 different technologies, some of them LED lighting, HVAC maintenance, some of this stuff quite basic, that you could actually save about 35% of what you were spending every year for effectively the same service. Now, there is a question of return on investment, because obviously some of this stuff isn't free. So some of them have like a 6-month payback, some of them 2 years. But broadly, what they're looking at there is effectively that's, in some ways, that's free money, right? Your point is, I think there was a point in the SRA 101 this morning that if there's a 20% reduction in energy usage, that's equivalent to a 5% sales increase. So that optimization piece seems the obvious one. If anyone wants that guide, that PDF I've got, it's like 30 pages. I'm not going to go through it here, but I can share it if anyone's interested to look at that return on investment and where it's worth spending the money. But there are some things that seem so basic, like maintaining your equipment and making sure they're working properly, installing PIR sensors so that lights aren't on when people aren't in the rooms, extractor fan switches, those sorts of things. They can all add to the reduction, I would say. And then the other thing I think I would look at saying with an existing space, I mean, ultimately the most sustainable restaurant is the one you already have. So when you're coming to look at doing something new, I guess the question is always asking, what is the least you can do to get the impact that you want to have? I always come at this from a customer experience perspective. I wrote a post on LinkedIn a few weeks ago where someone said to me that if you could only do 4 things in a restaurant and you were going to design it, what would you do? Where would you focus your energy? And I thought that's actually a really interesting question, because we dial back out to almost a place of behavioral economics and behavioral science. What are customers going to notice? What are the key things that build up an overall experience? And the 4 I came back to were: invest in a really good door handle, the first thing someone touches. Invest in the ceiling, because it won't get damaged by anyone because they can't touch it and you'll see it from everywhere. Invest in the cutlery, again, another physical touch point. And invest in the toilets, because it's the smallest controlled space you have for your customers to be in. So if I was to focus my money on 4 areas in a restaurant that would deliver a great experience, I would do those, and you would actually create something pretty decent, I reckon. So I've got some other stuff, but I think I've spoken enough now, so we should probably hand over.
Transition, I suppose, I guess, to Ollie and to Andre. And I think, you know, you made a really good point in that recognition of rearranging your menu to suit your wood burning stove. And I would imagine that has had some cost implications in terms of the energy use in your building, and the way that you guys not only just getting rid of that kit, but the actual kind of maintenance costs, ongoing costs. Is there any other, things that you guys can think of that come to mind in terms of savings that have been linked to sustainable changes you've made?
I invested in a voltage optimizer. I don't know, David might be picking me up on this or not, but it's basically we in this country we're allowed to go up to 215 volts, and depending on what equipment you need, that's what you need to run the equipment. And different parts of the country have different surges. And we found that I was actually running about 250, 255 volts going through my electricity thing. So that meant that I was frying my equipment and using 20% more energy than I needed. So I then installed a voltage optimizer, and that has reduced it by 20%.
That's really interesting.
Obviously, I had to pay for that equipment, obviously, by a standing.
Not expensive?
Yeah, it is expensive, but over the sort of period of 3 years, and then obviously it's a long-term business plan, but it is absolutely worth it.
I've not come across that. Sounds good.
Very cool.
A company called Beco UK, who can help with it.
We tend to think in our work at the SRA, we tend to think of the kind of savings side of sustainability being within the environmental section, I suppose, of so whether that's optimizing your energy use, restricting low flow water, and looking at ways that you're saving water, looking at any sort of circular solutions to your packaging, all of these sorts of reducing, reusing, recycling, because when there's that reduce at the front of it, it generally is good for both the environment and for your pocketbook. And I guess that seems to be quite straightforward, but then there's also this aspect of your wider supply chain, and how your supply chain plays a role in the sustainability of your restaurant, and what that might mean in terms of affordability and profitability. And I was wondering, Andre and Ollie particularly, if you guys could speak a little bit to that, and about how you're thinking about keeping your menu sustainable, your sourcing sustainable, sourcing the best ingredients possible, but also building in and ensuring that you are a profitable and successful restaurant.
Just about David's point. I think it was a really good point about being pragmatic. I think people spend too much time worrying too much about how things look and come across. And it's so nice to hear someone who's from the ergonomic side of the business who has turned around and said, actually, let's not start there. And I think that's one of the biggest issues we have with restaurants, is that we ought to just start at the very beginning. And for 99% of us, that's buying someone else's restaurant. And it already works, essentially. And I think it is just about finding a period of time in which to, with small steps, look to increase, improve, introduce, change, evolve, and make better, because the cost involvement there is far less. And I like the points about the cutlery, the toilets, and door handles, and ceilings. I'm happy to say 3 out of those 4 points are on my list. And when we took over Caluccio's in Oxford, one of the biggest changes we had was very nice toilet seats, brilliant, beautiful toilet seats, which make all the difference. We don't do the ceilings, so I'll look at that as well and add that to the list. So that but I'm happy to say that the other 3 that you mentioned are really relevant. I also want to make the point that I think, again, you know, to be, and we've been doing it for 20 years, and it's in the title of the company. And I've always said that making sustainability work is about trying to put it on the high street and making something that is achievable to all, rather than having a Hunter or a Barbary as a barber type tag, and you've got to have a Range Rover to get there. I mean, you know, it's about making it normal, I fear, and otherwise it'll never actually catch on. And in Europe, they make it normal in other respects. And I think sometimes you have to sometimes say, well, maybe half the artisan is better than the dead artisan. We've come through this huge period, and I'm happy to say we didn't really dilute our sustainable ethos and our ethics and our MSC and everything else. But sometimes as businesses, we forget that being in business and employing staff is probably the most sustainable thing you can do in this country. You know, it's not a bad word. It's not a dirty word. Having a business is great. You're paying taxes into a system which invariably make the world a better place. We forget all about that when we talk about sustainability, it's about everything else. But actually, I think that's really important. In terms of menus, I mean, there's 101 avenues I can sort of, you know, go down in regards to suppliers and their relationship with our menus. I suppose I'll just touch on 2 or 3. We work very closely with our suppliers, and until Brexit, you know, we had a very small group of suppliers that had the huge volume of trade that they received or enjoyed from us, and therefore we probably had a little bit more control over the pricing over that period of time. I'm a great believer that you shouldn't try and price out your customer base. Again, it should be less Notting Hill and more Northampton. And I say that because, you know, if you deliver something that's consistent, which I think is the biggest and most important dimension in anything we do in a relationship, is about consistency. It's about accessibility to a wide demographic. It's about having a good cost in which you get people through the door. And of course, having charming staff. But I fear that sustainability, and that's something that I'm very passionate about, it can't be the #1 component that you lambast across your business, because I hate to say it, that our customers who love to see the proprietor with the tea towel across the shoulder and, you know, the wonderful sustainability ethos that he or she delivers, if that business is not consistent and the staff are bloody miserable and it's a bit expensive, they won't come back, and you'll wonder why you're not in business. So I've sort of started, you know, 20 years ago with English barn-reared chickens, and now, you know, I've gone through the whole process. We have Rig Organic Farm with most of our meat, and, you know, I'm not going to go through all that now. We've gone through step by step, but I've always hung on to the simple fact, in my opinion, it's of trying to be a bit more pragmatic and remember that customers come out to enjoy each other's company, and I suppose not to be hit on the head by, you know, the philosophy or this zenith of sustainability that's very much in the moment. And if we can do it behind the scenes and they touch on it, then those customers that love all that will find it, they'll see it, they'll engage, and they'll buy into it. And those who don't, dare I say it, they pay our wages and they keep it all going for the rest of us. So I could spend 3 hours talking about sustainability on menus and food, but I've taken it from a slightly different angle, which is trying to remain a little bit more, you know, unsustainable in terms of the rhetoric. But that's only my opinion.
But I think that's a really good point there, because I'm very fond of saying that when you look at it, of what drives human behavior, which ultimately is what we're talking about, and most people do not want sustainable restaurants. They don't crave a sustainable restaurant. They want a great restaurant that happens to be sustainable. So I think your point is exactly right. A lot of that will get orchestrated behind the scenes, and you should be transparent and authentic, and people will want to find out about it. But even Douglas McMaster at Silo, he doesn't sell, hey, it's not like no bean in our kitchen over the door as they walk in. Most people that know in the foodie world will know how passionate he is about that stuff, but it's just kind of really great, interesting food that happens to be sustainable. There was a great article called The Elusive Green Consumer in the Harvard Business Review in 2018, when they talk about this intention action gap. So they'll ask people, how likely would you be to support a purpose-driven, sustainable business? And 65% said, yeah, no, that's what I do. That's what I care about. This is me. I really identify with that. And then they tracked their actual behavior and their actions. It was only 23% that actually followed through on that. So we are terrible judges of our own behavior. So I just want to support what you're saying. And actually, that's where intelligent understanding of what behavioral science is, what motivates humans to make decisions, how utterly irrational we are, understanding that and using the power of that to promote great sustainable food businesses, for me, is where this stuff gets really interesting. And you can therefore spend the money in the right place, which is the whole point around door handles, cutlery, toilets and ceilings, because you're putting it in the point where people will get the most impact from that, and therefore spending less money on the other things. So that whole affordable, profitable thing kind of comes back in.
Well, and there's a huge link to then the responsibility of the business owner, of the business itself, to build some of that stuff in from the back end. So absolutely linking to what you were just saying about that gap between people's intentions and their actions. One of my kind of favorite reference points over the years of the SRA is consistently in survey after survey, sustainable fish comes up as an issue that consumers care about, absolutely, that they would pay money for sustainable fish, and that they care deeply about not eating endangered species and all of that sort of stuff, in theory, when asked on a survey. But in reality, people are still buying prawns for £1, and there's a huge gap between people believe that if they are being sold it, and especially if they're being sold it in a restaurant, the assumption is that it must be sustainable. And so therefore they don't even think twice that that's not identifying with who they believe they are as a person. And therefore there's even more onus on the restaurant, I believe, to ensure that you're doing the right thing, because the customer isn't going to be the one that identifies that or consumes, makes that choice for you. So I think you've got to lead the way, and whether or not you sell it as sustainable seafood, or whether or not you just sell it as a beautiful seafood dish, as you do, Andre, and I mean, you do both in terms of how you talk about your food, but there's that opportunity to engage a person that isn't coming out looking for a lecture. They're just looking for delicious food, but you've led them and made sure they're not going astray.
And just one other thing is also, we forget that customers who are going out, and I'm going to make a generalization here, so as I often do, but let's just take the Southeast. I'm of the understanding that in the Southeast, people have a treat 3 or 4 times a week, right? Now, when I grew up, a treat might be once a month, and you sit in the back of a car in a pub car park, and that was the treat, and you had a pack of crisps. Now, honestly, that's how it was. Now, today, we still assume that having a takeaway, having something at lunchtime, and going out twice in the evening is a treat. But the bottom line is that it isn't a treat anymore. It actually, and that's what the supermarkets demonstrated in the very first 4 weeks of lockdown 1, it actually, we, the restaurant and hospitality, provide a huge amount of the food that people need beyond a treat. Because let's be honest, a treat, we would all agree, would be something which is unusual, special. But eating out in the Southeast has become a regular occurrence. And therefore, people behave, from a behavior perspective, think they're on a treat. So they suspend their values and the concept of sustainability and the beliefs they might have that they might well buy into at home, but when they go out 4 times in the week, that's been extrapolated not in once in a month, but 4 times in a week. So therefore, we must remember that we almost strategically and by stealth have to make the decisions for our customers, sometimes without them even realizing, dare I say.
So in that sense, you mentioned Silo and, for example, Dan Barber out in America, their sustainable ethos is their identity, it's their uniqueness that makes them why we want to go to them. We go to them almost to be preached on, to be told and have that journey. Whereas the rest of us, restaurateurs or whatever, I mean, I set up a pub sort of thing. I always did that because it was the every person's place to be. And it was really important to me that we never talked about sustainability. You came to the pub just to be at a pub, and it was woven through the whole sort of fabric without you even knowing. Ironically, lots of organizations and accreditations want you to be talking about it, to be telling your customers. And I think that's a difficult one as the restaurateur to get right. But what I think is really important is not to see sustainability as a thing we can preach upon, but actually the way we create uniqueness to our restaurant. So I know that my restaurant is unique by the suppliers I have. No one else uses those suppliers, and no one else uses the produce that I do. And therefore, it makes me a better product, and it makes me why people want to come to me. So people, getting those people through the doors and creating the customers that I want is relevant to sustainability. As a decision I've made in the sort of behind the scenes. And I also do, in terms of food, I've sort of saved probably sort of 15 to 20% on cost by being sustainable, which I know sounds odd, but the whole process of thinking is less is more. We all heard that quite a lot sort of thing. But if you break that down, what does that really mean? It means buying better produce. And if I've got better produce, I've got more flavor. And that's what we're all here for, is for flavor at the beginning. So I've got buy better produce. I do less to it. I need less ingredients to make that flavor taste good in the first place. And the customer gets what they want, which is what is on their menu. So there's a synergy between zero waste, in my head, organic and seasonal, but good produce, local produce, and then the locality of where that comes from. Freshness equals flavor. There is no doubt that freshness equals flavor. It's an energy thing. It's in the nutrients. And so that whole synergy of how energy and food and flavor works, which is why we're here, is super important to put sustainability at the heart of all our decision making, because once you do, it's a completely different revelation in the head to think differently. Not trying to, for example, if I'm trying to make carrot soup, I want to buy really good carrots, not carrots and chicken stock.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? Because it totally changes then your procurement and what you need to buy, and simplifies in some respects if you're kind of putting those ingredients at the heart.
I would say that I think there is a journey there that we're not quite where I'd like us to be, and where Ollie is. I won't call you Holly. Where Ollie is. I still think, if you compare us to the French, I still think we have a long way to go. And what I mean by that is, in France, it is more about what's on the table, and what the produce and terroir and everything that Ollie is referring to. And if the service is poor, it's poor. You'd go back. Again, in my opinion, in England, I still think that service is really important. And you might go and eat somewhere and the food is okay, but if you've been looked after and you feel valued, then you'll go back. So it's finding a way where you can actually dovetail what Ollie's talking about, which of course I'm a huge supporter of. That's what we do, but reminding ourselves all along that the sustainable ethos and the philosophy and the culture of what we all believe in is relevant only if our businesses are alive. And the business will only be alive, I fear, if your staff are good at what they do. And I think after the wonderful hedonistic summer we're about to have, we'll move into a more sort of the autumn. And that will come a quieter period where we'll suddenly realize service is really important. People realize they've spent too much money across the summer and they'll start contracting, in my opinion. And we'll suddenly realize that it's all about looking after the diner and reminding ourselves who they are, and all those little touch points that are really relevant. which thankfully after 21st of June, we can bring back in aplomb.
Yeah, so that's actually like a perfect segue to that next question, Andre, about how people play a picture in this, and treating your staff, you know, well, and ensuring that the diner is treated well, and that sort of training piece, and retaining good staff is part of the sustainability of the restaurant, and also plays a picture in this affordability and profitability for a restaurant. So, you know, I don't own a restaurant, but I do know that one of the largest kind of costs that restaurants have is in staffing and turnover, because retraining employees is expensive and hiring is expensive. I've been reading loads of stuff around chef shortages and staffing shortages that that we are starting to experience as the industry is rehiring. There's obviously been quite a lot of movement during lockdown, quite a lot of changes, people that, you know, were on furlough made different decisions, but also just people that have left and moved to different parts of the country, moved home, etc. And I think it's a global issue in terms of the chef shortage, and whether or not we have been kind of growing enough good chefs coming up the ranks. And I was wondering if, you know, you guys had some reflections on how staffing sustainably and thinking about your people plays a part in your profitability and your bottom line.
It's a great question because, you know, I think after as we were talking about earlier, the silence that we had after the first lockdown, I think most people are sort of realizing that we want a slightly better way of life than the 24/7 that we were before. And how do we achieve that as an industry? You know, as a pub, should I open on a Sunday, for example? The obvious answer is yes for the person and for the team. I'm in the countryside. You know, my team are reliant on also having a life. And if I was to make decisions where I'm open 7 days a week, would I lose them? The answer is probably yes, because they want now a better way of life. So there is a synergy to be had between a good business that is making money and also providing a nice life for the people who work for you. So yeah.
I think we're going to come back, and there was a view that with Brexit we were going to be in trouble with running staff, and then obviously COVID arrived and we forgot that Brexit existed. I mean, I can't believe that we forgot all about Brexit. But and with the removal of a lot of restaurants, a lot of seats, you know, in town centres, there has been a reduction of supply, and I don't think that's going to make our job any easier. I think there's going to be an issue with supply of staff, as there always have been. And we all know that you're absolutely right. The biggest cost to all of us is rehiring and employing staff. And the front of house staff are our ambassadors. Whatever they say, whatever comes out their mouth is going to be in some way a representation of the business that we like to believe that we're running. And invariably, those in the kitchen, if they don't turn up, is going to create huge pressure, huge stress, which invariably creates this horrible world whereby others will start to feel too much pressure and quietly move away, because chefs generally don't communicate effectively, don't talk to us, and we don't realize until they've resigned. I suppose it comes down to, I feel, having not a too bureaucratic corporate system where you've got all the training, everything in place, but you lose sight. You lose sight of being nimble and sympathetic and understanding what's going on a regular basis. And that comes down, I think, to a good restaurant manager. I think having a lack of hierarchy and somebody who's got 1 foot in the kitchen and 1 foot in the restaurant and understands people. It's really important with our small restaurants that the restaurant manager empathizes and has a relationship. Platonic, of course. We've already had, it's ridiculous, over COVID, we've had 2 situations where we've had to take staff to one side and remind them they're not allowed to touch each other, you know, and over 20 years, we've never had a problem. So the one time in our lives with our business that we've got a problem is when they shouldn't have been touching each other. And, you know, clearly, I feel that it's all about the restaurant manager making that relationship work. And in our businesses, we try and put the kitchens inside the restaurant. Again, we take on old chain restaurants, which are disheveled and depressed and quite miserable, and no one's really looked after them for 15 years because they've not made the right sales and they've been forgotten about. But we try very hard to pull the restaurant kitchen in, which means the chef can have a cup of coffee. He or she can see what the trade is like. All of a sudden, they've got some banter rather than being in the black hole of wherever in the basement and being forgotten about. So it's little touches like that that if you can do, make a big difference. But I think it's still quite old-fashioned. You've got to be, professional, first in, last out, care about the staff, and hopefully have some sort of system behind you that makes sure that the training is up to date and all your, all the legal stuff is being done accordingly. I don't think there's much more to do it than that.
Just to sort of touch on sustainability again, as I said earlier, for me, sustainability is the process by which we find our product, or I find my product anyway. And it creates a unique product. It creates purpose in our lives, really, because it sort of defines. It gives that extra dimension and that extra layer to our lives as to why we're doing something. So we've got a wood-fired pizza oven in the pub. We do wood-fired pizzas. People love them. But that next step for us is that we buy organic flour from around the corner. For me, that's great because obviously that's good for the planet. For my staff, they're sort of beginning to understand how that interacts with the land and how ingredients change. And so they're learning skills and they're actually learning food. But more importantly, it's just that direct link to the customer is that is the best flavored flour they're going to get, and therefore the best flavored pizza. So, and I've got now a team where they are proud of the pizza. You mentioned pizza, and it could be any sort of range between that sort of Leicester Square one on a Friday night to, Naples sort of thing. And through sustainability, we're creating a purpose in people's lives. And I think when running a great restaurant, knowledge is power. So in the training in the front of house, the more knowledge that people feel that they feel comfortable with telling the customer what that experience is, when the customer wants it, will only create, again, that more purpose for the customer as well as the staff.
I think that's a really.
And just to add on to that, Julianne, I think also, in order for us to run these sustainable businesses, I still feel that sustainability is this wonderful badge, but it's really important. I feel that some of the business elements are always central to everything that we do. So in regards to the staff, it is about the story. It is about everything to do with the story, and I'm a huge part of that story with all our staff. But it's also about making sure that people understand what they're doing there, and is there an accountability for their role and their job? Because hospitality 20, 30 years ago, accountability and P&Ls, it was the arrival of Pizza Express in the mid-90s where suddenly the city and Middle England realised there was a business called hospitality that could make lots of money. I mean, I'm generalising. Before that was Burnley Inn and Pizza Land and nothing much more. Now, the restaurant business is a big business, and our staff all have a part to play, and they have to understand what is their role and how does that fit within the business. It sounds corporate, and I hate all that, but it just means they won't make mistakes because they'll understand what they're doing there. And you can't talk and love and be passionate about sustainability when you haven't got enough teaspoons and the coffee cups aren't there and the KP hasn't turned up because it's a disaster. And you aren't just go home and say, I've had enough. And that's how restaurants used to be.
Yeah. And I think, there's a couple good things to recap, I think, on what you guys have just said. And I think one is with Ollie, with your points around purpose, I think one thing that we definitely are seeing is, starting to happen pre-COVID anyway, with younger people entering the job market, this idea that you wanted a job and a career with purpose has become increasingly important. And I think with COVID, that has, this balance, work-life balance, figuring out how we get back into work and what that is, I think people are reevaluating and ensuring that they want careers that mean something to them. So sustainability can add an element of that purpose and feeling connected. And then that point that you just made, Andre, where you can have the best intentions in the world, but you can also still be horrible at your job. And I think that's a conversation. I know us as the Sustainable Restaurant Association, whenever I have conversations with people who want to get into sustainable food or into the movement, and I think probably relevant to a number of you guys that are on this call and are looking for a job or a way in, you see a distinct difference between those that just come into it saying, I'm so passionate about sustainability and I want to make a difference in the world, versus somebody that says, I'm so passionate about sustainability, I want to make a difference. What I can add to this conversation is my communication skills, or I can be a great project manager to drive these things forward. Because the truth is, you need to be able to, deliver and do that work regardless of the passion. So having that, channel to have both the skills and the passion and the purpose are ultimately what matters in order to have a successful business.
I think that's a good point. I think to sort of summarize that, it's all about taking responsibility. And then, as Andre was saying, is that if every member of the staff is taking responsibility for their role, then the system works. And it's a bit like our supply chain. If we have from the land to, let's say, a piece of clothing, if we know each person along that line is telling the truth and we can see that truth, then there's no issue for the consumer to make that decision. It's an easy decision. But when it gets blurry and there's hiding and all those sort of things, that's when we lose touch of nature and we lose touch of how to trust other people. So I think when people take responsibility is I think is a really good core ethos to have throughout a business.
Totally.
And also, I would say that a lot of staff come into hospitality with no understanding, no awareness, and sometimes no passion for sustainability. And that's not a bad thing. It's just they don't know.
Yeah.
And they become educated as they evolve in their role. There are so many staff that have come over the last 20 years and worked for Lussmann's who didn't know, including me, who I have developed, or I've developed myself, but they've also developed along the way. So I would often think loads of staff from totally different backgrounds and different needs quite often know nothing about sustainability. And that's not on their tick list of who they want to work for.
Yeah, that's interesting.
We've been developing a sort of ambassador program at the hotel I've been working with. And the idea is that you always know when someone's come from St. John's, for example, in London. You just think, okay, well, they're going to be great, let's put them in, sort of thing. And you want to sort of develop this ambassador program. So when they do leave, and everyone will leave eventually, is that then you're then suddenly, oh, you were working at the Wheat Sheaf. Oh, right, so you'll get that, it's fine. Or you're working at Lussmann's, you'll get this, you understand that. And I don't know if the SRA are working on the sustainable scholarship or diploma yet, are you? But I think it was in the room.
Been talking about it.
Something like that. Just gives people an accreditations for, oh, right, okay, well, let's install that ethos that actually you are a level of knowledge as an establishment.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got about 10 minutes left in the session, so I'm going to open it up to those of you that have joined to ask any questions or engage in the conversation. Feel free to either add into the chat or just turn your video and your microphone on and jump in.
Whilst they're thinking, I'm happy to jump in with something that I was thinking earlier, and Andre touched on about taking on new sites. I didn't really go through kind of the financial opportunity there. Obviously, there is a big potential opportunity for operators, given that 12,000 people have gone out of business in the last year. There are an awful lot of sites that are sitting there already fitted out in some form, some not well looked after, others that are. And part of what we do in terms of looking at the restorative design framework, there is an opportunity to start and build on what is there rather than throw it out and start again. So one example, we did a coffee shop on King's Road last year for the Real Eating Company, and it was previously an Eat, obviously sandwich shop. And because the operational alignment was so good, because one coffee shop taking over another coffee shop, we managed to only spend probably 20% of what you would normally spend to fit out that space, because we were able to retain so much of the existing infrastructure and the layout. So there's huge opportunities to save money and do that. And I think, people are aware of that in the market if you're looking at sites. Then the only caveat I have to that is that I'm convinced that customers do not care whether you spend money or not, but they do really care and respond to whether you put effort in or whether they see you putting effort in. And sometimes spending of money equals effort because you get a very visible result. It doesn't have to be, but I think that the creative process of design for those sites is really important, because you need to make sure you understand that you're communicating that you haven't just done something that was easy for you as a business to save money, So that's where I think it's interesting, things like, rather than changing the face of a projecting sign and using the same bracket, no, let's get a new projecting sign made and it'll be beautiful and wonderful, and changing the door handle, and start doing some things you don't need to do, but that ensure the experience has been invested in. Getting those, but if you can get those two things together, you can still save an awful lot of money in terms of the fit out. Yeah, I just thought I was going to drop that in as a kind of a build on with a kind of case study with some cost examples, just to build on what Andre was saying.
Just as an example to that, every restaurant that I look at taking over has historically been a failing restaurant, and we spend a quarter of what our competitors would spend. And it's a bit like a rucksack when you go for a walk. The bigger the rucksack, the more crap you put in it. Forgive me, but it's the same. The more money you're given by somebody, the more you try and spend it. The beauty of having not a lot of money is that, and I never have enough money to do these bills, and I don't even have an architect, so we struggle. And sometimes we put the paint color on 3 times. But the bottom line is that we spend very little, and it's all about creative charm and trying to use your imagination. The only problem, David, I have found is 2. The only restaurant I built from scratch in an old bank, I closed it. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that the historical problems within the building, the copper piping and the waste and all the infrastructure, quite often has had no support for 10, 15 years. It's always just been, gaffered up. And what you've got there is, unfortunately, things that will only go wrong when you take a business that's doing $2,000 a week when you took over, or $10,000 a week, to doing 20 or 30 grand a week, then you're under pressure. But I still believe that designing on site and using what you've got is the best way forward to save money and to impress customers.
No, I'd agree. I think that's already good.
We've got one question coming through on the chat here. As a company newly transitioning to a sustainable ethos, the cost is a sudden increase in terms of the ingredients and the cost of each dish, which was resulting in them increasing their costs for, the pricing on their menu. What's the best way to get that message across to our customer as to why their prices may be changing? Ollie, do you have any thoughts on that one?
That's a dangerous one. I think as long as you put flavor first, people will sort of be happy to pay that little bit more. If they're sort of losing something, then they may not. And I think as long as the flavor is at the heart of it and the product's still the same, I think people should be aware of that extra little cost. Depends how big it is. I don't know. I mean, if it's too big.
I wonder too if when you were talking about the story of your flour and things, if putting the story of where that produce comes from is part of that message. So rather than the kind of, just idea that we're shifting to, it's more sustainable, it's more this, telling the story of the farm.
Is that people don't care.
Really?
They just want a really good pizza.
Yeah.
But from my angle, I know why it makes great pizza, because of the story. And we can tell people all day long, and Andrew was saying, like, those 20% of people who want to know, we can tell them, we've got it at our fingertips. The other 50% in the middle, we can tell them if we feel like we need to, and the other sort of 30% just don't care. So as long as, and I've said it like in the past, like sustainability is the way we create flavor. It's the way we create this product, because it is flavor in its entirety. It's working with nature. It's working biodiversity. It's working with harmony with nature. So, and everything we do, as long as you've got that system of zero waste, allows me to afford better produce. So maybe they could hopefully try and counterbalance those extra costs by being creative in their zero waste techniques to balance that out. So whatever they were buying in, perhaps there are ways we can sort of be creative to create a slightly different product from what they're buying in to balance out. And I think that's a really important thing to sort of understand, is zero waste. In nature, there is no waste. Everything has a byproduct, and that the most efficient system is a system that just creates byproduct after byproduct after byproduct. So for us, I mean, it's just really silly, but for example, sweet corn cobs, we take off the kernels, we roast down the sweet corn cobs so they're bare, and then we simmer them through milk and cream to make an ice cream, and it's totally delicious. And when we gave it to the customers, they were saying, oh wow, it tastes like creme brulee or custard and stuff. And it's like, you've created a vanilla flavor from a byproduct which is never used, that you would have put into the bin. So I think there is a huge amount of creativity that can be done in cooking to create new, unique flavors that we've never had before.
Love that. I love that. Well, we're coming to a close for this session, so I wonder if there's any final questions. Otherwise, we will do a quick wrap up.
Hi, Julian. I have one question.
Go for it.
Hi, it's James from Trust Water. I just wanted to ask, how much of a premium would an operator pay for sustainable sourcing? The reason I ask is we've created a charity water which gives back to the Drinks Trust, but it's made of aluminium. It's designed to pass on the responsibility of the ownership bottle to the end user because it's reusable, refillable. But compared to glass and compared to PET, it's about twice the price, maybe 3 times the price. Is that a premium that you would be prepared to pay for being sustainable?
Don't know if anybody wants to answer that one.
I've had a conversation with various water companies in terms of the restaurant table. It's slightly different because obviously they wouldn't have, James, they wouldn't have that metal container to fill up, because obviously they're coming to a restaurant. I've always been of the view that you've got to have quite strong beliefs in your own rhetoric, and quietly and consistently go ahead with it, and don't ask too many people for their views. And I say, with regards to water, lots of people knocked on my door over the last 20 years saying, can you sell us our water, or can you do our filtration system? And even I had a long conversation with the CEO of Baloo a number of times over the years, can we use our filtration system? And my view was very simple, was I think tap is fine. I mean, probably our tap is a benchmark across the world, if you know what goes on in terms of running water. And if you don't want that, then we have Baloo mineral water, which is all their profits go to WaterAid, and it's carbon neutral. So it's sort of the best of the rest. Naturally, if I was running a retail, I mean, beyond the year that we've just had where we were doing retail, I would consider what you're saying, and want people which were locals and regulars, and I'd give them some reason to buy into what you're saying. But for the restaurant table, it's not, it wouldn't work for us.
Our solution was that you'd sell the aluminium bottle, and then you would offer a refill, so you could offer free refills to the consumer. So that was the way that we were approaching it. So,
oh, I see, through a filtration system.
Yes. So we'd sell the bottle once that's already pre-filled, but then you can offer a free refill to your guests, so you're adding value. But obviously the price is a lot more.
I suppose it's down to personal view on the matter. I mean, I've argued it I take the view which is slightly different to yours, James, which is we've got tap water or mineral water, and you can choose between the two.
Choice. Yeah.
I don't like filtration system because it's another gadget or another unit that requires pack testing, cleaning, organizing, sorting, will break down on Saturday night, and all of a sudden the water will come out green. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but I hate stuff because it always goes wrong when you least need it. So that's my opinion, James.
Okay.
All right. Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap this session, as I think there's maybe one more session around the day that some others might be joining. So thank you so much to everybody for joining us this afternoon. Thank you to Andre and David and Ollie for your wonderful contributions. And do keep the questions and conversation alive on the platform, and hopefully see some of you guys around at the other sessions tomorrow.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Have a nice evening.
Bye.
Okay, goodbye, everyone.